question. Why are you using this gate?
Because that's what the orders say. The verification number is on the page.
I'm asking you, not the paper.
Then call the listed Navy liaison and confirm it.
I think there's a problem with these papers.
Then verify them.
Shut up and turn around.
What happens when a local port officer decides his ego matters more than federal law? This is the story of the moment. A port officer made the career-ending mistake of detaining a high-ranking black naval commander traveling on active duty orders. He ignored the rank, ignored the protocol, and walked straight into a disaster he created himself. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from. And if you follow stories about abuse of authority, accountability, and people who know exactly where they stand, like the video and subscribe. This started at a secured port gate on the East Coast during the morning operations rush. Trucks were lining up, workers were moving, scanners were active, and everybody at that gate had a lane and a process. Commander Julian Cross came through the military access lane in a government vehicle with active orders, military identification, and transfer paperwork ready before the officer even reached the door. He didn't improvise anything. He didn't try to talk his way through. He came in exactly the way he was supposed to. Officer Trevor Pike walked up already acting like he had a problem with what he was looking at. Not cautious, not professional, irritated. And that was the first issue. He didn't start with the normal verification routine. He didn't take the paperwork and run the check. He started by questioning why Cross was there at all. That matters. A trained officer at a controlled gate checks documents first. Pike did the opposite. He treated the commander like he was already lying. Cross identified himself, gave his rank, and handed over the orders. The paperwork clearly showed active duty movement tied to the port. The contact number for confirmation was on the page. The ID matched, the vehicle matched, the lane matched. None of that changed Pike's tone. Instead of verifying the documents, he started pressing Cross with side questions. He wanted to know why he was alone, why he was using that gate, why he was driving that vehicle. The answers were already in the paperwork sitting in his hand, but by then this wasn't really about information. Pike had already moved into that mindset some officers get when they think backing off makes them look weak. Cross stayed calm and answered him anyway. He explained he was under active duty orders and told Pike he could call the listed Navy liaison and confirm everything in a minute or two. That was the easy exit. That was the professional exit. Pike ignored it. He handed the paperwork back without completing the check and told Cross to step out of the vehicle. That's when the whole thing turned. Cross got out. Slowly. Hands visible. No attitude. No sudden movement. He kept it tight because he understood exactly what kind of situation this had become. He had been in command long enough to know that once a local officer starts performing authority instead of using it properly, the risk goes up fast. So he kept his voice level and repeated the same point. Active duty status, valid orders, federal movement, verification available right now. Pike kept cutting him off. He moved closer, started talking louder, told Cross that rank didn't mean anything at his gate until he said it did. That line told everybody nearby what kind of officer he was. He wasn't confused. He wasn't trying to secure the checkpoint. He was trying to win a face-to-face power contest with a man he had decided not to respect. And yes, race was already sitting in the middle of it, because Pike had every clean reason in the world to verify those papers and move on. But he kept choosing confrontation instead. He looked at a black man in command, holding valid federal orders, and acted like the problem was that the man in front of him didn't fit whatever picture he had in his head. By then, people around the gate were watching. A cargo driver in the next lane had stopped looking at his phone and started looking at them. Two dock workers near the barrier turned fully toward the checkpoint. One clerk inside the glass booth was already glancing between Pike and the paperwork. Nobody needed to guess that this had stopped being a routine check. Cross tried one more time to keep it procedural. He told Pike again to contact the Navy Transportation Liaison listed on the orders. That was the right move. It also gave Pike another chance to fix it before he buried himself. He refused again. Then he said something worse. He questioned whether Cross really held the rank he claimed, not whether the documents were authentic, not whether dispatch had confirmed anything. He questioned the man himself. That was the moment the professional mask dropped. Now it was obvious this wasn't a documentation issue. Pike had decided that the person standing in front of him didn't look like somebody he was prepared to treat as a commander. Cross didn't take the bait. He didn't get loud. He didn't posture. He stated very plainly that Pike was interfering with an active-duty military movement and refusing a basic verification step. That should have made any competent officer pause. Pike did pause, but not because he suddenly understood the law. He paused because he realized people were watching, and he'd already pushed too far to back down easily. That's when ego usually gets dangerous. Once an officer like that feels an audience, he starts thinking about pride, not policy. He worries more about not looking wrong than about actually being wrong. That's exactly what happened here. Pike looked around, saw phones coming out, saw workers staring, and instead of calming the scene down, he doubled down in front of everybody. He told Cross he was being detained until he could sort it out. That statement was the whole case in one sentence. Pike still hadn't verified the orders, still hadn't called the listed military contact, still hadn't identified any actual offense. He just decided detention was the next move because he wanted control back. Cross remained where he was and made the situation clear for the record. He stated that he was a naval commander on active duty orders, that Pike had been given valid identification and paperwork, and that Pike had refused to use the listed verification channel. He was doing two things at once there. He was protecting himself, and he was building the timeline out loud for every camera that might later review the scene. That was smart. Very smart. Because this story was no longer living only in Pike's head or in a report he could clean up later. It was at a port gate, in public, during operating hours, with witnesses, cameras, and radio traffic already moving through the system. And Pike still didn't stop. He reached for the detention anyway. That decision was the one he was going to wear for the rest of his career, because while he was trying to prove he ran that gate, someone else had already heard enough over the radio to understand that a local officer was interfering with a Navy commander traveling under orders, and that someone was already heading toward the checkpoint. Lieutenant Elena Ward got to the gate before Pike could drag it any further. She walked into the lane, saw Cross standing outside the vehicle, saw Pike still trying to control the scene, and went straight to the point. She asked Pike what the issue was. He told her he was detaining Cross because the paperwork looked suspicious, and the situation didn't make sense to him. That answer fell apart fast. Ward asked whether he had run the verification process on the orders. He said no. She asked whether he had called the military contact listed on the paperwork. Again, no. At that point, Pike had no real defense. He had already moved into detention before doing the basic job in front of him. Ward took the documents from Cross and actually read them. That was the difference. She checked the identification, the transfer orders, the access authorization, and the movement details. Everything was there. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing was missing. The contact number was printed right on the page. She called it. The call took less than a minute. Chief Warrant Officer Noah Bennett picked up and confirmed exactly what Cross had been saying the whole time. Active duty status, valid orders, scheduled arrival, authorized access. That ended the factual dispute right there. There was nothing left for Pike to figure out. He had already been wrong, and now his supervisor had it confirmed on the phone. Ward asked him why he had detained an active duty naval commander without making that call first. Pike tried to talk around it. He said the commander was being difficult. He said something felt off. He said he needed to secure the gate. None of that helped him because the facts were already set. The commander had presented valid ID, valid orders, the correct vehicle, and the correct lane, and Pike ignored the verification route that would have cleared it immediately. That's where the situation stopped being a bad judgment call and started looking like misconduct. Ward told him to release Cross right away. Pike didn't like being corrected in public. You could see that. He stalled for a moment, then stepped back and ended the detention. He still didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge that he had caused the entire problem. He just backed off because now there was another officer there with more authority. And this time it wasn't a black commander he felt comfortable dismissing. That part matters too. Cross kept it professional. He didn't make a scene. He asked for names and badge numbers. Ward gave hers immediately. Pike was slower about it. Cross noted the time, the gate location, and who was present. He was building the record while Pike was still thinking this might stay small. It wasn't going to stay small. The people nearby had already seen enough to know this wasn't a normal check. One driver had recorded part of the detention from the next lane. 2 dock workers had their phones out. The gate clerk inside the booth had watched the whole thing from a clear angle. On top of that, Pike was wearing a Bodycam, and the radio traffic had already gone through the system. That meant there were multiple records of what happened before anybody got a chance to rewrite it. Ward understood the problem immediately. This wasn't just one angry officer making a bad stop. This was a local port officer interfering with a federal military movement after refusing to verify active duty orders. That creates legal exposure fast. It creates command pressure fast. And once military channels get involved, people above the Port Authority start asking questions that nobody at that gate wants to answer. Cross left to continue his assignment, but he didn't let it die at the checkpoint. He reported the detention through Navy channels the same day. That pushed the issue outside local control. Now, the Port Authority wasn't just dealing with a complaint from the person Pike detained. They were dealing with federal attention, documented interference, and a timeline that looked bad from the first minute to the last. Internal Affairs got notified almost immediately. That tells you how serious it was. Most departments slow-walk complaints when they think they can bury them in paperwork. This one moved the same day because the risk was obvious. All anybody had to do was look at the order sheet, the verification number, and the detention decision. Pike had the documents, he had the process. He skipped both and went straight to control. That's what was about to ruin him. And it got worse once Internal Affairs started pulling background, because this wasn't coming into the system as a clean first incident. Pike already had prior complaints. Similar pattern, aggressive stops, poor judgment, problems with escalation. None of that had been serious enough to force action before. Now it was all coming back into the file, attached to a federal incident. That's how careers actually collapse. Not always with one moment out of nowhere. Usually with one moment that forces people to look at everything they ignored before. By the end of that day, Pike still had his badge, but the ground under him was already gone. His supervisor had verified the commander's orders herself. The witnesses had video. The body cam existed. The radio logs existed. The Navy complaint was in motion. Internal Affairs had the case. And once all of that starts moving together, the officer usually isn't deciding anything anymore. Internal Affairs moved on it that same day because the case was too risky to sit on. By then, this wasn't just a complaint from somebody angry at a checkpoint. This was a documented detention of an active duty naval commander traveling under valid orders, and Pike had done it after refusing the most basic verification step available to him. That's what made the whole thing dangerous for the department. The problem wasn't only what he did to Cross. The problem was that he did it in a place with cameras, witnesses, radio traffic, and a supervisor who had already confirmed he was wrong. So Internal Affairs started with the easiest part, the record. They pulled Pike's body cam. They pulled the gate footage. They pulled the radio logs. They pulled Ward's report. They pulled the witness video from the driver and the dock workers. Then they built the timeline. And the timeline killed Pike. It showed Cross arriving in the correct lane, in the correct vehicle, with military ID and written orders. It showed him offering the paperwork immediately. It showed him directing Pike to the listed Navy contact for verification. It showed Pike refusing to make that call. Then it showed him escalating to detention anyway. After that, it showed Ward arriving, reading the same paperwork, making the same call Pike refused to make, and getting confirmation almost immediately. That's the kind of timeline you can't explain away. It's too simple. Pike had the documents. Pike had the number. Pike had the process. He ignored all three. Then they got into the body cam. That's where the excuses usually die, because Pike's version of events started falling apart the moment the footage was reviewed. Cross never matched the kind of behavior Pike would later try to imply in his first statement. He wasn't hostile. He wasn't evasive. He wasn't threatening. He kept saying the same thing the whole time. Active duty orders, correct access, verify the paperwork. That consistency mattered. It showed control, and it showed that Pike wasn't reacting to danger. He was reacting to not being obeyed the way he wanted. And then there was the language. Internal Affairs pays attention to wording because wording tells you what an officer was actually thinking in real time. Pike kept framing the situation around his personal suspicion, not around a policy failure or a security issue he could describe. He questioned the commander himself instead of verifying the documents in front of him. That difference matters. It's one thing to say the paperwork needs a review. It's another thing to look at a black commander with valid orders and act like the real problem is that you don't believe a man like that should be standing there in that role. That's where the racial profiling issue got stronger. Not because Pike said something cartoonishly racist. Officers like him usually aren't that stupid on camera. It came through in the choices. He ignored every fact that should have lowered the temperature. He skipped verification. He dismissed rank. He challenged identity instead of process. Then he pushed the situation into detention when he started getting watched. That pattern tells its own story. Internal Affairs also reviewed Pike's prior complaints, and now the department had a bigger problem. This incident didn't come into the system as a one-time lapse. It attached itself to older complaints that showed the same pattern: over-aggressive stops, escalation when challenged, and repeated issues involving black men. Those complaints had never forced a serious response before. Now they look different because this time, the department had clear video, a federal complaint, a supervisor who contradicted Pike in real time, and a victim with military standing and paperwork that checked out instantly. That's how an officer goes from being difficult to being a liability. Ward's report made it worse for him too, because she didn't soften it. She documented that Pike failed to verify valid active duty orders before detaining Cross. She documented that verification was completed in under a minute when she made the call. She documented that Cross was released immediately after confirmation. That report mattered because it came from Pike's own chain, not from the commander, not from a lawyer, not from a bystander. One of his own supervisors basically put in writing that this thing never should have happened. Then the Navy complaint hit. Once that came in through formal channels, the Port Authority command staff lost room to play games with it. Now they weren't just looking at discipline. They were looking at federal interference, public exposure, and institutional embarrassment. Cross had been on active duty movement. The officer at the gate ignored it, detained him, and delayed the assignment for no legitimate reason. That's the kind of case that gets attention above the local level fast. Pike still had to give a formal statement, and that interview didn't help him. He tried to frame the detention as a judgment call made for security. Internal Affairs pushed back because that answer didn't fit the evidence. Security concerns get tested through procedure. Verification is part of the job. He skipped that and went straight to control. Then he tried to justify the detention after the fact. That doesn't hold up when the video shows the person you detained literally handing you the verification route. At that point, the case was basically done. Not officially closed yet, but done. The department knew it. Internal Affairs knew it. Ward definitely knew it. Pike probably knew it too, even if he didn't want to say it out loud. Because once the evidence shows that you had the facts, had the process, ignored both, and then detained the wrong man in public, the question stops being whether you messed up. The question becomes whether the department is willing to keep wearing you. And in this case, that answer was coming fast. By the next morning, Pike was removed from gate duty. Internal Affairs had the Bodycam, gate footage, radio logs, Ward's report, and the Navy complaint. All of it showed the same thing. Cross gave valid ID and orders, offered verification, and Pike ignored it. Then Ward made one phone call and confirmed everything in under a minute. That ended Pike's defense. His older complaints came back up too. Similar pattern: aggressive conduct, escalation, bad judgment. This time, the department couldn't hide behind excuses because the case involved a black naval commander on active duty orders and public evidence from multiple angles. Pike was terminated. His port clearance was revoked. His case was also referred for decertification review. Cross gave a formal response after that. He kept it professional. He said the issue was bigger than one officer. The problem was poor training, poor supervision, and local officers not understanding the limits of their authority when federal military orders are in play. After that, the port changed procedure: mandatory verification steps, new training on military access, clearer supervisor escalation rules. That's the story. Pike thought he was controlling a gate. What he actually did was hand Internal Affairs an easy case and end his own career. Cross didn't beat him with volume. He beat him with paperwork, protocol, and self-control. If you've ever seen somebody abuse a little authority and pay for it later, put it in the comments. And subscribe for more stories like this.
Who are you and who cleared you to be here?
FBI, this is a federal operation. We need to stop and verify through command.
You're inside my perimeter.
No, you're inside my scene.
Watch your mouth.
I'm giving you the cleanest way out of this.
Turn around.
You putting hands on a federal agent before clarifying everything?
Deputy Cole Mercer believed he controlled the crime scene. By the time anyone realized how far he had gone, he had already handcuffed the undercover FBI agent running the operation. Ethan Cross told him he was federal. He showed credentials. He told him the scene was part of an active investigation. Mercer ignored all of it. He treated Cross like a civilian interfering with police work. He gave orders. Cross repeated that Mercer needed to stop and verify. Mercer refused. Then he put him in cuffs. That was the first major failure. Not the handcuffs by themselves. The refusal to verify before using force. Comment where you're watching from. And if you follow stories about authority, misconduct, and real consequences, like and subscribe. This happened at an industrial storage site outside a suburban commercial strip. Federal agents had been working the location for months. The case involved stolen firearms moving through a local distribution network. The FBI had built it slowly. Surveillance, informants, controlled contacts, scheduled movement. The plan that night was simple. Federal agents handled the operation. Local deputies secured the outside perimeter and stayed in their lane. Mercer did not stay in his lane. He arrived with a county unit assigned to perimeter support. Within minutes, he started acting like scene command belonged to him. He repositioned deputies without asking. He challenged people he did not recognize. He made the kind of fast, confident decisions that look decisive until they turn out to be wrong. Cross was near the loading zone when Mercer focused on him. Plain clothes, work boots, dark jacket. That was intentional. Cross had been inside the operation long enough that he could not look like law enforcement. He was not standing around. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, monitoring a transfer point tied to the case. Mercer saw a man he did not know and decided that was enough. He walked over and started questioning him in a hard tone. "Who are you? What are you doing here? Who cleared you to be on this side of the perimeter?" Cross answered in the shortest way possible. He identified himself as FBI. He told Mercer this was a federal operation. He told him to get a supervisor and verify. Mercer did not do that. He demanded credentials. Cross produced them carefully and directly. Mercer looked at them and rejected them without checking anything. No radio verification. No supervisor. No contact with the federal command post. That changed the situation. Up to that point, Mercer could still claim he was sorting out confusion at a busy scene. Once he had credentials in front of him and refused to verify, it became a choice. Cross kept his voice level. He did not argue. He did not posture. He told Mercer again that he was interfering with an active federal investigation. Mercer responded by raising his voice and tightening control. He started framing Cross as non-compliant. That matters because officers often build the justification for force with language before they use it. Once Mercer described Cross as refusing commands, he gave himself cover for the next step. Cross still did not give him what he wanted. No sudden movement, no shouting, no resistance. Mercer ordered him to turn around. Cross knew exactly what was happening. He also knew fighting with a county deputy in the middle of a live operation would make the scene worse. So he complied. Mercer grabbed his arm, turned him, and cuffed him. Other deputies noticed it immediately. Not because they knew who Cross was, but because the interaction made no sense. They had just watched a plainclothes man present federal credentials and get handcuffed anyway. A few of them slowed down and looked over. Nobody stepped in yet. That usually happens when a bad decision is made quickly by someone acting certain. People hesitate. They assume maybe he knows something they do not. Mercer kept talking after the cuffs were on. He said Cross had failed to follow commands. He said nobody moved through his perimeter without clearance. He said he was securing the scene. He was not securing the scene. He was creating liability. Cross said very little after that. He did not need to. Mercer was making the record himself, and there was a record. Mercer's body camera was running. Other deputies had cameras on too. Federal surveillance teams were also active nearby because the operation had already been underway before Mercer arrived. This was not a case where facts would depend on memory later. The sequence was captured. That mattered because Mercer was still acting like this would end with his version of events controlling the report. It would not. One deputy finally asked Mercer quietly whether anyone had verified the credentials. Mercer brushed him off, said he was handling it, said the man was obstructing, said federal or not, nobody was above his authority on that scene. That line said everything about how he was thinking. He believed presence gave him control. He believed volume could replace procedure. He believed local authority could override a situation he did not understand. He was wrong on every point. Cross remained in cuffs near the loading area while the operation stalled around him. That is another part people miss in stories like this. One officer's ego does not just create a personal conflict. It disrupts the work. It puts cases at risk. It forces everyone else to stop managing the actual threat and start dealing with him. And command had not even arrived yet. That was coming next. And once federal supervisors stepped onto that scene, Mercer was going to lose control of it completely. Mercer's first problem was not the FBI. It was his own sergeant. Daniel Navarro came in from the south side of the perimeter after hearing Mercer on the radio and saw Ethan Cross in cuffs near the loading area. He looked at Mercer, then at Cross, then at the badge wallet in Mercer's hand. He asked whether identity had been verified. Mercer said the man had claimed to be federal, but was interfering and refusing direction. Navarro asked again, verified or not. Mercer had no clean answer. That told Navarro enough. Cross gave his name. Calmly. Ethan Cross, FBI. Lead case agent. Active operation. Mercer already had that information. He had chosen not to use it. Navarro told Mercer to uncuff him. Mercer didn't do it. He started explaining himself and said, scene security, officer safety, unknown plainclothes male inside a restricted area. He kept talking like the more words he used, the stronger it would sound. It didn't. Before Navarro could force the issue, federal vehicles came through the secured lane, 3 SUVs, fast stop, doors open, agents out. Vanessa Reed was first, special agent in charge. She moved straight toward Cross. She saw the cuffs immediately. Then she looked at Mercer, then at Navarro. She asked who detained her agent. Mercer answered before Navarro could. He said Cross had refused commands and obstructed the perimeter. Reed asked whether credentials had been presented. Cross said yes. Navarro said yes. One of the other deputies said yes. That ended Mercer's argument right there. Reed asked why a deputy assigned to outer perimeter support had handcuffed the undercover FBI agent running the case after seeing credentials. Mercer tried to shift again. Said nobody had informed him who Cross was. Said Cross did not identify himself clearly enough. Said he had to make a quick decision. Bad answer. Cross had identified himself. Mercer had seen credentials. The quick decision was the problem. Navarro stepped in and removed the cuffs himself. Cross brought his hands forward and rubbed his wrists once. That was it. No speech, no yelling. He was already back on the job. He told Reed the local perimeter had been disrupted. His detention had interrupted federal movement, and Mercer had ignored repeated instructions to verify through command. That was the version that mattered. Short, precise, hard to challenge. Mercer still tried. He said Cross had challenged his authority. That line hurt him more than anything else he had said so far. It showed exactly what this had been about. Not confusion, authority. Reed asked him who gave him scene command. Mercer had no answer, because there wasn't one. County units were there to support the perimeter. That had already been briefed. Mercer had taken more than that on his own. Navarro told Mercer to step back and stop talking. He did not argue with that order. He just stood there looking like he was trying to work out whether there was still a way to recover it. There wasn't. By then, several deputies had already seen enough to know this was going nowhere good. They were not focused on the warehouse anymore. They were watching Mercer, watching Navarro, watching the federal side lock the sequence down in real time. And everything was being captured. Mercer's Bodycam was on. So were the other deputies' cameras. Federal teams had their own recordings. The warehouse had already been under observation before local units arrived. This was not a memory fight waiting to happen later. The record existed already. Navarro requested county command to the scene. He also told dispatch to flag all camera footage for retention. That is not something supervisors do over a routine disagreement. He knew this was heading straight to internal affairs. Reed kept the focus where it belonged. She asked Cross one question. Could the operation continue? Cross said yes, but not cleanly. Timing had been affected. Perimeter attention had shifted. One transfer window was already gone. That mattered. Mercer had not just embarrassed himself. He had interfered with a live investigation. Navarro pulled Mercer aside and asked him directly why he had not verified the badge. Mercer said he did not like how Cross spoke to him. That answer was even worse than the first one. It meant he had made an enforcement decision based on tone, not facts. Navarro asked if Mercer understood that he had detained a federal agent without verification, without probable cause, and while assigned to a support role, he had already exceeded. Mercer did not answer that either. He started saying he had been trying to maintain control. Navarro cut him off. It was never his scene to control. That was the end of Mercer as an active officer on that scene. A county lieutenant arrived minutes later. He got a short briefing from Navarro and Reed. Both versions matched on the important points. Credentials shown, verification refused, federal agent detained, operation interrupted. The lieutenant did not spend time debating language. He took Mercer off scene duty immediately. He ordered another deputy to replace him at the perimeter. He told Mercer not to discuss the incident, except through formal review. Mercer handed over his camera unit and stepped away. That was the first official sign that the department was separating itself from him. Cross went back to work because the case still existed, whether Mercer had damaged it or not. Reed moved agents back into position and adjusted the plan. Some of the original timing was gone. One contact point had already collapsed. They salvaged what they could. Mercer stood off to the side, with no role left. That's what officers like him never expect. They think the bad part is getting corrected in front of people. It's not. The bad part is when everyone around them keeps working and they realize they've become the incident. Before the scene was fully closed, Internal Affairs had already been notified. County Command requested all radio traffic, body camera footage, and scene logs. Federal legal counsel was looped in before midnight. Mercer was told he was being placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Same night, no delay. That's when it finally landed. He hadn't just made a bad call. He had made a record the department could not defend. Mercer wrote the report like he still had control. He didn't. By the next morning, Internal Affairs had the body cam. County Command had the radio traffic. The FBI had already documented the disruption to the operation. Mercer's report said Cross was obstructive. The video showed Cross identifying himself, showing credentials, and telling Mercer to verify through command. Mercer's report said the detention was necessary for scene security. He was perimeter support. It was never his scene to run. That ended the argument before the hearing even started. He was pulled from duty. Badge turned in. Weapon turned in. Access cut off. Cross spent that same morning documenting what Mercer had damaged. The interruption had cost time. It had shifted attention away from the target area. It had disrupted the operation at a critical point. He kept the report narrow and factual. That made it worse for Mercer, not better. Internal Affairs interviewed the deputies who were there. Their statements matched the footage. Cross identified himself. Credentials were shown. Mercer refused to verify. Navarro told him to fix it. He kept going. That matters. A rushed mistake is one thing. Refusing to stop after multiple chances is something else. Then Command looked at Mercer's file. Old complaints, prior warnings, notes about scene behavior and authority issues. Nothing that had ended his career before. Now it all sat next to a body cam video that was impossible to defend. The FBI filed a formal complaint. Straight facts, no drama. That carried weight fast. A county deputy had interfered with a federal operation after being shown credentials by the lead agent. The sheriff's office tried the standard public response first. Brief statement, active review, no further comment. That lasted until the story got out. Once local media learned that a deputy had handcuffed the undercover FBI agent running the case, the department lost control of the narrative. The public did not need a long explanation. The facts were enough. Mercer went into the disciplinary hearing with one defense. He said he acted under pressure in a fast-moving scene. That did not hold. The video showed the sequence clearly. Cross identified himself. Mercer saw credentials. Mercer chose not to verify. Mercer escalated anyway. That is not pressure. That is a decision. The findings came back quickly. Violations on detention procedure, interagency protocol, chain of command, false reporting. He was terminated. That was the official result. The bigger results came after. Federal trust in the county side took a hit. Joint operation procedures were reviewed. Briefing rules were tightened. Supervisors had to answer a basic question they should never have had to answer in the first place. Why did a perimeter deputy think he could overrun a federal scene and handcuff the lead agent? That became the training issue. Not just Mercer, the system around him. Cross finished his reporting and moved on. He did not need to keep talking. The incident already said enough. Mercer had several chances to stop before it reached termination. When Cross identified himself, when the badge came out, when Navarro asked if identity had been verified, he ignored each one. That is why he lost the job. If you've seen officers treat protocol like an obstacle instead of a rule, put it in the comments. Share the story with someone who thinks authority excuses bad judgment. And subscribe for more stories like this.
You need to step away from the vehicle.
I'm authorized to be here,
That's not what I asked.
and I just answered the part that matters.
Why are you in this area?
Because I am permitted to be in this area.
You're being evasive.
No. I'm being
Step away
precise.
from the car.
On what basis?
Because
That is
I
not
told you
basis.
to.
What happens when a police captain decides to test his authority in the one place where procedure matters most? This story started in a restricted federal courthouse parking area. A precinct captain saw a man by a parked vehicle, assumed he didn't belong there, and turned a simple verification into a public confrontation. What he failed to process, even after being told directly, was that the man was a federal judge. By the time courthouse security stepped in, the damage was already done, and the cameras had all of it. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you like stories about people getting exposed when they abuse authority, like the video and subscribe. Captain Victor Hale walked into the situation like he had already made up his mind. Judge Adrian Holloway was standing beside his car in a reserved courthouse zone for judges and cleared personnel. The vehicle permit was displayed properly. Access to the area was controlled. This wasn't some open public lot where people wandered in by mistake. Hale approached and challenged him right away. Not with a basic question. More like he was confronting someone he believed he had caught. Holloway answered in a calm, controlled way. He identified himself and explained that he was authorized to be there. Hale didn't leave it there. He asked for more identification and kept pressing. His tone got sharper. He started treating the exchange like an investigation instead of a quick check. Officer Marisol Vega was close enough to follow every word. She could already see the problem. Hale was escalating before confirming anything. Holloway gave him the easy solution. He said courthouse security could verify his access immediately. Hale ignored that and kept pushing his own version of the situation. He questioned why Holloway was in the area. He spoke to him like he was making excuses instead of giving an answer. That got attention. A few courthouse employees near the entrance slowed down and looked over. In a federal building, people notice fast when a routine interaction stops looking routine. Hale then told Holloway to step away from the vehicle. Holloway stayed where he was. He didn't get loud. He didn't argue. He just repeated that he was authorized to be there and that Hale could confirm it through security. That should have forced Hale to stop and check. Instead, he treated the refusal to move as defiance. That was the real shift. At that point, Hale wasn't trying to understand the situation. He was trying to win it. He started framing Holloway as uncooperative. He spoke like his command alone settled the issue. Vega looked toward the building entrance. She knew security could clear it up in seconds. Hale still hadn't asked. Holloway stayed measured. That only made Hale look worse. Every calm answer made the captain's behavior harder to justify. Then Hale said something that changed the whole encounter. He made it clear he believed his authority on that scene outweighed whatever Holloway was claiming. That wasn't a misunderstanding anymore, that was ego. Inside the courthouse, Security Supervisor Thomas Greer had already been alerted that there was a problem in the restricted parking area. He was on his way out. Thomas Greer, the courthouse security supervisor, came out after getting word that there was a problem in the restricted parking area. He saw the situation right away. Captain Victor Hale was pressing the encounter. Judge Adrian Holloway was standing by his vehicle, calm and steady. Officer Marisol Vega was nearby, watching and saying nothing. Greer asked what the issue was. Hale answered first. He said he was dealing with a person in a restricted area and was trying to confirm authorization. That sounded reasonable on paper. It didn't match what had already happened. Holloway identified himself again. Same answer as before. He said he was a federal judge and that his access could be confirmed through courthouse records. Greer recognized him immediately. He confirmed Holloway's identity on the spot. He also confirmed that Holloway was authorized to park there. That should have closed the matter. Hale didn't let it go cleanly. Instead of ending the interaction, he tried to defend how he handled it. He said he was following procedure and checking a restricted space. The problem was obvious. A simple verification would have resolved it at the start. Hale had skipped that and gone straight into confrontation. Greer made it clear there was no parking violation and no access issue. Holloway belonged there. The matter was settled. Holloway didn't add drama. He didn't argue. He let the facts stand on their own. Vega stayed quiet, but by then, the whole scene had turned against Hale. Security had confirmed the judge. Witnesses had seen the exchange. The body camera was still running. Hale backed off, but not in a professional way. He didn't acknowledge the mistake. He didn't apologize. He just stepped away and acted like the encounter was finished. It wasn't. What happened in that parking zone was already on video from more than one angle. Courthouse security had its own coverage. Hale's body camera had the audio and his conduct. People nearby had watched enough to remember exactly how it unfolded. Greer escorted Holloway inside without making it bigger than it already was. Hale left the area believing he had avoided a serious problem. He hadn't. By the end of that day, the footage had already been requested for review. Captain Victor Hale left the courthouse thinking the incident would stay small. He was wrong. Federal courthouses don't handle problems like a neighborhood complaint. Everything is documented. Access points are monitored. Security reports get logged. When a local police captain challenges a federal judge in a restricted area and keeps pushing after being told who he's dealing with, that doesn't disappear. By the end of the day, the encounter had already reached courthouse administration. Security Supervisor Thomas Greer filed his report first. He kept it factual. Time of incident, location, who was present, what was said, when verification happened, when the matter should have ended. That report mattered because it came from the person responsible for access control. He was the one who could say, clearly and without guesswork, that Judge Adrian Holloway had valid authorization the whole time. Then the camera review started. Courthouse security footage showed Hale approaching fast and setting the tone immediately. It showed Holloway staying by his vehicle and not making any threatening movement. It showed Greer arriving and resolving the issue within moments. Hale's body camera made it worse. The audio confirmed that Holloway identified himself early. It confirmed that security verification was available from the start. It also confirmed that Hale kept pressing instead of checking first. That was the problem in simple terms. He had options. He ignored them. Internal Affairs got the referral the next morning. Investigator Naomi Kerr took the case. She wasn't interested in excuses or polished summaries. She started with the footage, then compared it to written reports, then pulled Hale's history. That's where the situation got more serious. The courthouse encounter by itself was already bad. A precinct captain had escalated a routine contact in a restricted federal zone, dismissed clear identification, and acted like his authority solved everything. That alone could trigger discipline. But Kerr found this wasn't isolated. There had been prior complaints, not identical, but close enough to matter. Incidents where Hale had turned routine interactions into control contests. Cases where people said he got confrontational when challenged, especially when someone calmly told him he was wrong. Most of those complaints had gone nowhere. A warning here, a notation there. Nothing that actually stopped the pattern. Now the department had clean video. That changes everything. Hale submitted his own report. He tried to frame the encounter as a standard security check in a sensitive area. He described Holloway as resistant and said he was trying to maintain control until identity could be confirmed. The footage undercut that version line by line. Kerr noted the gaps immediately. Hale had claimed caution. The video showed escalation. He had claimed uncertainty. The video showed that verification was available and ignored. He had claimed procedural concern. The video showed that once security confirmed the judge, he still tried to justify himself instead of acknowledging the mistake. Officer Marisol Vega was interviewed next. She answered carefully, but she didn't protect Hale. She confirmed that Holloway identified himself early. She confirmed that security could have verified access right away. She also confirmed that the tone of the encounter became more aggressive as Holloway stayed calm. That statement hurt Hale more than the footage in some ways. Video shows conduct. A second officer confirms judgment. Now it was no longer one person's interpretation. It was a documented pattern in one incident. Within days, Hale was pulled from active command duties, pending the outcome of the investigation. That got attention inside the department fast. A captain doesn't get sidelined over nothing. Word spread. First through supervisors, then patrol units. then courthouse personnel who had already heard about the parking lot incident. And once people knew there was footage, the tone changed. Nobody wanted to defend something that was already on camera. Judge Holloway didn't go public. That mattered too. He didn't hold a press conference, didn't make speeches. He let the record develop on its own. By the end of the first week, Internal Affairs had enough to move past simple review. The case was now about misconduct, failure to follow procedure, and possible dishonesty in reporting. And that's when Victor Hale finally understood the real problem. This was no longer about one bad interaction in a parking area. It was about whether he could still hold rank at all. Once Internal Affairs lined up the footage with the written reports, Victor Hale's position got weak fast. The case against him wasn't complicated. He challenged a man in a restricted federal parking zone, ignored a direct identification, passed on the easiest way to verify it, and kept pressing after courthouse security confirmed the truth. Then he filed a report that made his own conduct sound more reasonable than it was. That's the kind of thing departments can work around once. Maybe twice. Not when there's clean video. Investigator Naomi Kerr finished the review with 4 core findings. Hale escalated without need. He failed to verify available information. He mishandled the encounter after the judge identified himself. And his written account didn't match what the cameras showed. That last part did the real damage. A captain can survive a bad judgment call. It gets much harder when supervisors stop trusting what he puts in writing. The department suspended him first. That bought time for command staff to review the file and decide how far to take it. By then, the answer was obvious. Too many people had seen the footage. Too many people knew exactly what happened. He was terminated, not transferred, not reassigned, finished. Inside the department, the case spread quickly. Nobody needed an official memo to understand what it meant. The story moved through patrol units, supervisors, courthouse contacts, and command staff because everyone could see the same thing. This whole mess started because a captain wanted control more than he wanted facts. Marisol Vega came out of it differently. Her conduct was reviewed, but she wasn't tied to the escalation. She hadn't driven the encounter, and she didn't try to cover it afterward. Her statement matched the video, and that mattered. Judge Adrian Holloway kept his response measured the whole way through. He didn't go looking for cameras. He didn't turn it into a public campaign. He let the record speak for itself. That made the result harder to dispute. Courthouse security also changed procedure after the incident. Local officers dealing with anyone in restricted judicial parking had to confirm status through security before pushing an enforcement contact any further. Basic rule, simple fix. It should have already been standard. Hale did try to defend himself. He said he was acting within his authority. He said he was protecting a secure area. He said he was making a judgment call in real time. That argument collapsed on review, because none of this came down to a close call. He had a clear path to verify the situation, and he chose confrontation instead. That ended his career, and honestly, it should have. This wasn't about confusion, it wasn't about pressure. It was about ego taking over in a place where procedure exists for a reason. So that's the story. A routine check turned into a career-ending mistake because one captain decided being challenged was worse than being wrong. What would you have done in that situation? Put it in the comments. And subscribe for more stories where the footage, the reports, and the facts all catch up with the person who thought they were untouchable.
Step out of the vehicle, right now.
Sheriff, you need to contact the FBI field office before you touch anything here.
You do not sit in my county, refuse my questions, and hide behind a badge.
This is a federal matter. Verify it.
Turn around, you are being
If
detained.
you cuff me, you are interfering with an active federal investigation.
The sheriff kept asking the same question, only louder each time. He wanted to know why an unmarked black SUV had been parked near the old feed mill for almost 40 minutes. He wanted the driver's phone. He wanted the keys. He wanted the vehicle opened. The man behind the wheel stayed calm and told him the same thing he had already told the deputy. This involved a federal matter, and the sheriff needed to contact the FBI field office before touching anything inside that vehicle. That answer did not land well. Sheriff Wade Miller stood beside the driver's window with 2 deputies behind him and his body camera recording from the center of his chest. He had the posture of a man used to people folding once he got close enough. But the driver didn't fold. He kept both hands visible. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue in circles. He only repeated that the sheriff was about to interfere with an active federal investigation. Miller took that as a challenge. A few seconds later, he ordered the man out of the SUV. The driver stepped out slowly and warned him again that this was bigger than a county traffic stop. Miller ignored that warning. Then the cuffs went on. And that was the moment Sheriff Miller accidentally arrested Special Agent Marcus Hale, an undercover FBI agent working a case that was already circling closer to Miller's own department than anyone in that county knew. Before we get into how it all fell apart, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your state or country in the comments, and if you like stories about power, accountability, and people finally getting exposed on their own cameras, hit like and subscribe. Now, here's how this started. Claiborne County, Georgia was the kind of place where the sheriff's name carried more weight than the county commission. It wasn't a big city department with layers of oversight and reporters camped outside headquarters. It was a rural sheriff's office with one main station, a handful of patrol zones, and a local government that had spent years avoiding open conflict with Wade Miller. Miller had been sheriff for 17 years. People who liked him called him firm. People who had dealt with him on the wrong night had a different opinion. They said his deputies didn't ask questions so much as test how much pressure a person would take. Traffic stops ran long. Searches happened after people said no. Complaints disappeared into internal review and came back with the same finding almost every time: unfounded. That word had protected Miller's office for years. By the time the FBI started looking around Claiborne County, they weren't there because of one bad stop or one angry citizen. Federal investigators had been tracking a larger pattern involving seized cash, towing contracts, missing evidence, and a private security company that seemed to keep winning county work without a clean explanation. Marcus Hale was assigned undercover because he didn't look like what people expected from a federal agent. He was in his early 40s, calm, careful, and easy to underestimate. That was useful. He could sit in a diner for an hour and look like a contractor waiting on a job. He could walk through an equipment auction and pass as a buyer. He could listen without making people feel watched. That evening, Hale was in Claiborne to observe the old Barlow feed mill. The building had been shut down for years, but it still had activity. Trucks came through after dark. Men met there without going inside. Sometimes items moved from one vehicle to another in the gravel lot. Nothing obvious enough for a takedown yet, but enough to matter. Hale parked his unmarked SUV off County Road 14 at 6:38 p.m. He had a secured radio, 2 phones, a small camera setup, and case material that local officers had no business seeing. His job was simple: watch, record, and wait for a target connected to the county's contract network. At 6:51, Deputy Calvin Roach drove past. Roach was one of Miller's most loyal deputies. Not the smartest one in the building, not the most disciplined, but loyal, and in Miller's office that counted for a lot. Roach slowed when he saw the SUV. Then he kept going. A minute later, he turned around. Hale saw the cruiser come back in his mirror and already knew this might become a problem. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't start the engine. He waited. Roach pulled in behind him and turned on the lights. On the body camera, the first part looked routine enough. Roach walked up, asked what Hale was doing out there, and looked past him into the SUV like he was already hoping to see something. Hale gave him a limited answer. He said he was working in connection with a federal matter and that Roach needed to verify through proper channels. Roach asked for identification. Hale handed over his driver's license and federal credentials, but he didn't give operational details. That part matters. Undercover agents don't burn a case just because a county deputy gets curious on the roadside. Roach didn't seem to know what to do next. He stared at the credentials, asked who Hale was working with, asked what agency contact could confirm it, then asked why the FBI would be in Claiborne County without telling the sheriff. That was already the wrong question. Federal agents don't need a local sheriff's permission to work a federal investigation. They may coordinate when it makes sense, but they don't hand over sensitive details just because a sheriff wants to feel included. Hale explained that verification had to go through the field office. Roach didn't like that answer, so he called Miller. That call changed everything. Miller arrived about 12 minutes later in a white department SUV with his name printed across the side. He didn't walk up like someone trying to calm the stop down. He walked up like Roach had called him to take control. Roach gave him the short version, and it was already slanted. He said Hale was sitting near the feed mill, refusing to explain himself, showing federal credentials, but not cooperating. He also said there might be equipment in the SUV connected to whatever Hale was doing. Miller went straight to the window. He asked Hale for his full name, agency assignment, supervisor, reason for being in the county, and permission to search the SUV. Hale gave him the same answer Roach had received. He had identified himself enough to be verified, but he would not disclose the operation on the roadside, and he did not consent to a search. That was where Miller's tone changed. You could hear it on the body camera. He wasn't confused anymore. He was offended. He told Hale that nobody sat on a county road in Claiborne, refused to answer questions, and hid behind federal credentials. Hale didn't take the bait. He told Miller to contact the FBI field office. Miller asked what was in the vehicle. Hale said he wasn't discussing the contents. Miller asked if there were recording devices. Hale said he wouldn't answer operational questions. Miller asked if Hale was investigating someone in his county. Hale said again that any verification needed to go through federal channels. That was the whole stop in one pattern. Miller kept trying to turn a verification issue into a control issue. Hale kept refusing to give him more than he was entitled to receive. And Miller was not used to that. By then, another deputy had arrived. Lena Price. She was younger, quieter, and not part of Miller's inner circle. Her body camera would later become important because it captured the scene from farther back. Price didn't say much at first, but she watched. She saw Hale's hands. She saw the credentials. She saw that he wasn't trying to flee, wasn't making threats, wasn't reaching around the cabin, and wasn't acting like a criminal suspect. She also saw Miller getting angrier because the stop wasn't bending his way. Miller ordered Hale to step out of the SUV. Hale asked if he was being detained. Miller said he was. Hale asked for the legal basis. Miller said he was interfering with the sheriff's investigation. That answer made no sense. Hale was sitting in a parked vehicle before Roach ever arrived. The only investigation on that roadside was the one Miller had created after the fact. Hale stepped out anyway. He knew exactly what was happening. The roadside wasn't the courtroom. It wasn't internal affairs. It wasn't the federal complaint process. Arguing too hard right there would only give Miller more footage to twist later. So Hale moved slowly, kept his hands open, and stated clearly that detaining him would interfere with an active federal investigation. Miller told Roach to cuff him. Roach hesitated for half a second. Not long, but enough for the camera to catch it. Then he pulled out the handcuffs and locked them around Hale's wrists. No one at that scene understood the size of what had just happened. Not yet. But within the hour, that arrest would reach the FBI office in Atlanta. By the next morning, the Department of Justice would be asking for every second of body camera footage. And by the end of the month, Sheriff Miller's department would no longer be treated like a local agency with a few bad complaints. It would be treated like a civil rights problem with badges. What Miller didn't understand in that moment was that arresting Hale wasn't just a bad decision on a roadside. It changed the category of the whole situation. Before the cuffs went on, this could still be explained as a deputy overreacting, a sheriff getting territorial, maybe even a messy misunderstanding between local and federal law enforcement. Still bad, but survivable. After the cuffs went on, and especially after Hale's SUV was opened, the county had a federal obstruction problem. That's the part Miller missed. He was thinking like a local sheriff who had spent years being the final word in every room. If a driver questioned him, he pushed harder. If a deputy hesitated, he barked an order. If someone filed a complaint, his office controlled the paperwork. That system had worked for him for a long time, but it only worked because the people challenging him were usually ordinary citizens. People with jobs, families, bills, and no realistic way to fight a sheriff's office for months or years. Marcus Hale wasn't in that position. He had a field office behind him. He had check-in protocols. He had tracking. He had supervisors who knew exactly where he was supposed to be and when he was supposed to report. So when Hale missed his scheduled check-in, the issue didn't sit in some local complaint folder. It moved. Fast. At first, Miller still acted like he was handling a normal arrest. Hale was placed in the back of Deputy Roach's cruiser, and Miller ordered the deputies to secure the SUV. That phrase sounded official enough, but the body camera footage later showed what it really meant. They opened the door, looked through the cabin, and handled material they had already been warned not to touch. Deputy Lena Price noticed the problem almost immediately. She didn't make a speech. She didn't challenge Miller in front of everyone. But her body camera caught her telling Roach that they should verify with the FBI before going any further. Miller shut that down. That moment mattered later because it showed the department had a chance to slow down. Someone on scene recognized the risk. The sheriff ignored it. That's the kind of detail investigators love, because it separates an honest mistake from a choice. And Miller kept making choices. He had Hale transported to the Claiborne County Sheriff's Office instead of waiting for federal verification at the scene. He directed deputies to log Hale's property. He pushed for obstruction charges, even though the only thing Hale had really obstructed was Miller's curiosity. By the time Hale entered the station in handcuffs, the case had already outgrown Miller. Then the FBI arrived. Special Agent Dana Brooks didn't come in yelling. She didn't need to. She walked into the lobby with 2 agents behind her, identified herself, and asked where Marcus Hale was being held. That was when the front desk went quiet, because everybody in that building understood something Miller still didn't want to accept. This wasn't a local arrest anymore. This was now a federal incident, recorded from multiple angles, involving a sheriff who had ignored warnings, detained an undercover agent, and allowed deputies to touch federal material connected to an active investigation. From there, the pressure moved from the lobby to the paperwork. Brooks requested preservation of every body camera file, dispatch recording, booking video, radio transmission, report draft, and text message connected to the stop. Miller tried to say the department would review the matter internally. That was almost funny. Not because the situation was funny, but because Miller still thought internal review meant something when the FBI and DOJ were already involved. Brooks made it clear the evidence was to be preserved immediately. No edits, no missing clips, no overwritten files, no camera malfunction story 2 days later. And that's when Miller's old system started failing him, because the whole department had been built around local control. Control the stop, control the report, control the complaint, control the outcome. But federal investigators weren't asking for Miller's version. They were taking the records. The old complaints were what changed everything. Hale's arrest was the headline, but the federal investigators quickly understood it was only the cleanest example of a much larger problem. Cleanest because it had video. Cleanest because the victim was a federal agent. Cleanest because Miller had ignored warnings in front of his own deputies. But the pattern had been there for years. Once the DOJ started pulling records, the sheriff's office couldn't hide behind vague internal summaries anymore. They had to produce the actual files, stop reports, search logs, complaint forms, body camera audit trails, use of force reviews, emails between supervisors. text messages from command staff, and the picture was ugly. Drivers had complained about being stopped without clear reasons. Families had complained about deputies entering homes without proper consent. Business owners had complained about cash being seized during traffic stops and never returned. Several black residents had filed complaints that sounded almost identical. Deputies claimed they smelled something, searched the car, found nothing, then wrote the report like the person had caused the problem. That kind of repetition matters. One complaint can be dismissed, two can be debated. Dozens with matching language across different years and different deputies start looking like a system. The DOJ also found something else. A lot of the complaints had been reviewed by the same small circle of supervisors. Miller's people. The findings were nearly always the same. No policy violation, no misconduct, no further action. Even when body camera footage contradicted the written report, the office had still cleared the deputy. That put the county in a terrible position. Because now this wasn't just about whether Miller had overreacted to an undercover FBI agent. It was about whether Claiborne County had allowed a sheriff's office to operate for years with almost no real oversight. And that's exactly where the investigation went. Deputy Lena Price became one of the first internal witnesses to cooperate. She didn't pretend she had fought the system for years. She was honest about that. She had stayed quiet too many times. She had told herself that one deputy couldn't change the office. She had worried about retaliation, bad shifts, stalled promotions, and being labeled disloyal. That honesty made her useful. She explained how the department really worked. She told investigators which supervisors edited reports before they were finalized. She explained which complaints were treated seriously and which ones were buried from the start. She described the pressure deputies felt to back Miller publicly, even when they knew he had gone too far. Once Price talked, others followed. Not everyone. Some deputies stayed loyal to Miller until the end. Some acted like they had seen nothing, heard nothing, remembered nothing. But a few decided they weren't going down for a sheriff who had spent years making every decision about himself. Federal investigators compared their statements with the footage, logs, and old complaints. The stories lined up. That was when the county stopped defending Miller. County Attorney Elise Morton advised the commissioners that continuing to back the sheriff could expose the county to even more liability. She wasn't interested in speeches. She was looking at numbers, federal findings, and the kind of consent decree that could strip the county of control over its own department. The financial fallout came fast. The county agreed to a multi-million-dollar federal settlement tied to Hale's unlawful detention, the handling of federal material, and broader civil rights violations uncovered during the investigation. On top of that, several private lawsuits were reopened or newly filed by residents who had complained for years and finally had federal findings to support them. The fines and settlement costs hit hard. Claiborne had planned road repairs, a school resource expansion, and upgrades to the county emergency system. Suddenly, all of that was under review because the sheriff's office had created a financial disaster. People who had ignored complaints for years were now angry for a different reason. The misconduct had become expensive. That's usually when institutions start caring. Then came the consent decree. A federal judge approved oversight terms that changed how the Claiborne County Sheriff's Office operated. Miller no longer had the final say over internal affairs. An outside monitor would review stops, searches, arrests, complaint investigations, and body camera compliance. Deputies had to document legal grounds for searches in detail. Supervisors had to review footage, not just reports. The old way was over. No more clearing a deputy because the paperwork sounded clean. No more missing body camera files without consequences. No more treating complaints like trash unless the person complaining had power. The criminal side moved too. Roach was fired first. He was later charged with obstruction and false reporting connected to the arrest and search of Hale's SUV. Prosecutors argued that He knew Hale had identified himself and still helped create a report that made the detention sound justified. 2 supervisors resigned after investigators found they had approved false or incomplete reports in earlier cases. A lieutenant who oversaw internal affairs was terminated after federal auditors found complaint files had been altered or closed without required interviews. Then Miller's turn came. He resigned before the county could force the issue, but it didn't save him. A federal grand jury indicted him on charges tied to obstruction, deprivation of rights under color of law, and making false statements during the investigation. That last one mattered. A lot of officials survived the original misconduct and get caught lying afterward. Miller had tried to frame the stop as a lawful detention of an evasive subject. The footage showed something else. The dispatch logs showed something else. Price's body camera showed something else. He had built his defense on a version of events the evidence wouldn't support, and the public saw it. When the body camera footage was finally released, the reaction was immediate. Not because people had never seen an unlawful stop before. They had. But this one showed the whole power structure in a simple way. A sheriff was told to verify. He refused. A federal agent warned him. He ignored it. A deputy hesitated. The sheriff pushed forward. A department that had controlled complaints for years suddenly had no control over the evidence. Residents of Claiborne County started showing up at commission meetings with their own stories. Some brought old complaint letters. Some brought court records. Some brought phone videos that had never gone anywhere before. The Hale case gave people a reason to believe someone might finally listen. That was probably the biggest shift. Not the headlines, not the fines. The belief that the sheriff's office could actually be challenged. Over the next year, Claiborne County's department changed almost completely. More than a dozen employees were fired, resigned, or retired early. The county brought in an interim sheriff from outside the region. Deputies went through new training on federal coordination, search law, traffic stop documentation, and duty to intervene. A civilian review board was created with access to complaint outcomes. Stop data had to be published every quarter. Was it perfect? No. Departments don't become trustworthy overnight because a judge signs an order. Culture takes longer than policy. Some residents still didn't trust the new leadership, and honestly, they had every reason to be cautious. But the difference was that the office no longer got to grade its own homework in secret, and that mattered. Marcus Hale returned to federal work after the case, though not immediately. The arrest had compromised part of the investigation, but it also exposed something federal agents had been struggling to prove. Claiborne County's sheriff's office wasn't just sloppy. It was protecting itself at the expense of people's rights. Hale never became loud about it publicly. He didn't need to. His calm on the roadside had done enough. His restraint gave investigators clean evidence. His refusal to reveal sensitive details protected the case. His insistence on procedure showed exactly who was following the rules and who wasn't. Price stayed with the department under the new administration. Some people called her brave. Others said she should have spoken up sooner. Both things could be true. That's how real accountability usually looks. Messy, late, still necessary. As for Miller, the man who once acted like Claiborne County was his personal territory, ended up fighting his case in federal court, answering to a system he couldn't intimidate. That was the lesson. Power feels permanent when nobody checks it. But once the records come out, once the footage is preserved, once people inside the system start telling the truth, the whole image can collapse fast. And in this case, it started with one sheriff thinking a badge gave him the final word. It didn't. So, what would you have done if you were Deputy Price watching that stop go wrong in real time? Would you have spoken up on the roadside or waited until federal investigators arrived? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about power, accountability, and people finally being forced to answer for what they did, subscribe before you leave.
Oh, ma'am, step away from the vehicle now. Keep your hands where I can see them.
My identification is in the front seat, and courthouse staff can verify me immediately.
That robe does not prove anything. Anybody can buy a costume like that.
Not prove anything. Anybody can buy a costume like
Then
that.
verify it. Call the courthouse. Call.
What happens when a deputy gets so locked into his own authority that he stops doing the one thing his job requires first? Verify. A routine stop at a gas station turned into a public detention when a deputy decided a woman in judicial robes had to be faking it. What he didn't realize was that the woman he tried to embarrass at the pump was a federal judge, and the camera on his chest was recording every bad decision in order. Before this gets deeper, drop where you're watching from in the comments. And if you follow stories about power, rights, and people who know exactly when authority crosses the line, hit like and subscribe. This one only gets worse for the deputy from here. The woman at the center of it was Judge Lena Whitaker, a federal district judge in her early 50s. Calm voice, controlled posture, the kind of person who didn't waste words because she didn't need to. At that moment, she stood beside her sedan at Pump 6, still wearing her judicial robe over a dark dress because she was on her way from a courthouse event to a community legal forum across town. She had stopped for fuel because the tank was low. Normal errand. Bad timing. Deputy Cole Branson had pulled into the station a minute earlier after a caller reported a suspicious woman dressed like a judge near the pumps. That call should have led to one simple thing. A quick check. Name, identification. Maybe a call to dispatch. Maybe a supervisor if needed. Done. Instead, Branson treated the whole thing like he'd already cracked a fraud case. By the time the body camera footage started getting passed around later, the key detail wasn't confusion. It was refusal. He had multiple chances to confirm who she was, and he rejected everyone. At the pump, Branson started pressing her hard. He demanded identification and told her the robe looked like a costume. He said people impersonated officials all the time. He made it sound like her standing there in plain view, fueling her own car in early evening traffic, was some kind of criminal performance. Judge Whitaker stayed measured. She gave her full name. She identified the federal court she served on. She told him her courthouse chambers could confirm her identity within minutes. She told him court security could verify her. She even pointed out that her identification was inside her bag in the front seat. That should have ended it. It didn't. Branson had already moved past checking facts. He was defending the first bad assumption he made. That's where officers get into trouble. The moment they stop investigating and start protecting their ego, the stop changes shape. It stops being about safety or procedure. It becomes personal. The station itself was busy enough for witnesses, but not crowded enough for noise to hide what was happening. A cashier inside the convenience store, Maya Ruiz, kept glancing out through the glass because the deputy's tone didn't match the setting. A delivery driver named Tyrone Bell had pulled up to the next island and slowed down his own routine when he realized this wasn't a normal police contact. Two women by the air pump turned to watch. Everyone could feel the same thing. The deputy was escalating faster than the facts justified. Judge Whitaker didn't feed that energy. She didn't posture. Didn't pull rank in the dramatic way people imagine. She just kept handing him exits. Verify with dispatch. Verify with the courthouse. Verify with federal security. Look at the credentials in the car. Any competent officer would have taken one of those off-ramps. Branson didn't. He kept insisting the robes proved nothing. He said anyone could buy one. He said real judges didn't stop for gas dressed like that. It was one of those statements that sounds dumb the second it leaves someone's mouth, but he was too deep in it to hear himself. And now witnesses were listening. That mattered. Because once a deputy says something that irrational on Bodycam, the whole stop starts reading differently. And not cautious, not careful, reckless. He wasn't struggling to understand the situation. He was refusing to accept an answer that would end his authority over it. To understand how it got there, it helps to back up about 40 minutes. Judge Whitaker had spent most of that afternoon at a federal courthouse outreach event tied to a naturalization ceremony and a student legal education program. That was why she still had the robe on. The schedule had run late. She had planned to stop only long enough to fill the tank and head to the next appearance, where she was expected to speak briefly about public trust in institutions. That detail would get ugly later, because while she was on the way to speak about trust in the system, a deputy was busy damaging it in public. She had served on the bench long enough to know exactly how police authority was supposed to work. She also knew something else. The law looks neat in a courtroom and messy in parking lots. In the real world, a bad stop can spin out because one officer decides being questioned feels like being challenged. Branson was the type who confused confidence with judgment. Mid-30s, a few years in uniform, too comfortable issuing commands. He had learned how to sound certain before he learned when certainty should stop. The 911 call fed that weakness. The caller had reported someone looking suspicious in official-looking clothing. Vague, thin, the kind of thing that requires caution, not theater. When he arrived at the station and saw Whitaker in a black robe, he locked onto the visual and ignored the context. Nice car, calm behavior, public setting, no attempt to flee, no signs of fraud, no effort to approach anyone claiming authority. She was pumping gas. That was it. But once he told himself he had caught someone pretending to be a judge, every fact that contradicted him became, in his mind, part of the act. So he came in hot. He asked what court she supposedly worked for. She answered. He asked for ID. She told him where it was. He asked why she was dressed that way. She explained the event she had just left. He dismissed that, too. Then he made the mistake that would haunt him later. He stopped checking her answers and started mocking them. Not loudly at first, just enough. A little edge in the voice. A little disbelief. Enough for everyone nearby to hear that he had already decided she was lying. Judge Whitaker recognized the pattern almost immediately. A routine encounter was turning into a power test. She knew better than to match his tone. She kept hers steady and specific. Name, court, verification options. She made it easy for him. He made it hard on himself. By the time Tyrone Bell lifted his phone and started recording from the next pump, Branson had shifted from suspicious to aggressive. He told her to step away from the car. She did. He told her to keep her hands visible. She did. He told her he was detaining her while he sorted this out. That was the point where the stop crossed from embarrassing to serious. Not because he was still confused, because he had chosen detention before verification. And standing under the gas station lights, with a federal judge in front of him and multiple witnesses watching, Deputy Cole Branson kept digging. Deputy Branson had already made the worst kind of mistake by that point. He didn't just suspect something. He committed to suspicion before doing the easy work. And once an officer does that in public, every next move gets more dangerous, because now pride is involved. At the gas station, Judge Whitaker stood a few feet from her car, with her hands visible, while Branson talked at her like he was exposing a scam. He kept circling the same bad point. The robe meant nothing. Anybody could buy one. Anybody could claim a title. That part was true in the most useless way possible. Anybody can claim anything. That's why officers verify. That's the whole job. He acted like the possibility of deception somehow excused him from checking. She kept giving him the same answer in different forms because that was the cleanest way to box in the facts. She identified the federal district she served in. She told him where her courthouse was. She told him her chamber staff could confirm her within minutes. She told him Federal Protective Service officers would know exactly who she was. Her tone stayed level. No panic, no speeches, just facts. Branson answered facts with commands. He told her not to reach into the vehicle. Fine. She didn't. He told her to stay where she was. Fine. She did. Then he started asking the kind of questions that made the whole scene look worse, not better. Why was she still in the robe? Why would a real judge be at a gas station? Why didn't she have a driver? Why should he believe any of this? It was sloppy. He was no longer investigating a reported concern. He was trying to make ordinary details sound suspicious because he needed the stop to justify itself. The people around them could see it. Maya Ruiz, the cashier inside, later said the judge looked annoyed but controlled, while the deputy looked like a man trying to win an argument he had already lost. Tyrone Bell kept recording from his truck. His video would matter because it caught the wider scene, the deputies pacing, the witnesses looking at each other, the judge staying planted and not giving him anything he could twist into resistance. That's what made the footage bad for him. Not drama, control. She wasn't escalating. He was. Then came the line that flipped the stop from bad judgment into something much harder to defend. Whitaker told him calmly that a real officer verifies identity before accusing someone of impersonation. It wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, but it landed. You could hear the shift right there in the Bodycam audio. Branson didn't take it as information, he took it as disrespect. He shot back that the robe was a fake costume until he said otherwise. That line was poison for him later, because now he'd said out loud what he was actually doing. He had replaced procedure with personal authority. He wasn't saying he needed to verify. He was saying his belief came first, and reality had to wait behind it. That's how lawsuits get built, one sentence at a time. Whitaker didn't raise her voice. She told him again to call the courthouse. She told him again to call federal court security. She even gave him a name to ask for. That should have been the easiest moment in the world for him to recover. Make the call, get the answer, end the stop. Instead, he doubled down again and told her she was being detained for investigation of impersonation and failure to comply. Failure to comply with what, exactly? That was the problem. She had complied with every physical instruction. She stepped away from the car, kept her hands visible, stayed put. What he meant was that she wasn't surrendering the basic truth of who she was, just because he found it inconvenient. Branson moved her towards the front quarter panel of his patrol unit and positioned her there while he talked into his radio. Even then, he still didn't use the radio the right way. Instead of verifying her identity cleanly, he framed the call around a suspicious woman dressed as a judge claiming federal status. That wording mattered. It contaminated the stop. He was feeding dispatch his conclusion instead of asking for facts. That's another thing bad officers do when they start slipping. They narrate themselves into being right. Whitaker caught that too. She told him he was misstating the situation and that the station cameras, witness phones, and his body camera were preserving all of it. That was the first moment his posture changed a little. Not much. Not just enough to notice. He finally realized this wasn't disappearing into paperwork. There would be a record. Still, he kept going. He asked whether she expected him to believe that a federal judge was standing at a pump alone in full robe. The answer was obvious. Yes. Because that was exactly what was happening. Life doesn't stop being real just because it looks unusual for 30 seconds. Judges stop for gas. Doctors buy groceries and scrubs. Firefighters pick up food in uniform. Adults understand context. Branson was acting like context was optional. A second deputy arrived and slowed near the pumps. For a moment, it looked like the scene might calm down. Sometimes a second officer resets the first one, gives him a way to climb down without admitting he messed up. But Branson got to him first. He gave a quick version that leaned hard into the idea that she was probably impersonating a judge and being evasive about proving otherwise. That wasn't true, and it was all on camera. Whitaker corrected the record immediately. She said she had repeatedly offered multiple verification routes and that Deputy Branson had refused to use them. Tight, specific, clean. She was building the timeline in real time because she knew exactly where this could end up. The second deputy didn't jump in much. That told its own story. He looked uncertain. He looked like a man realizing he had stepped into somebody else's bad stop. Smart officers feel that early. They start watching their own exposure. By then, a few more people had phones out. Nothing wild. Nobody yelling. That actually made it worse for Branson. There was no chaos to hide behind. No crowd pressure. No fast-moving threat. Just a deputy making one bad decision after another in a bright, ordinary place. Then, the supervisor call finally happened. Sergeant Denise Harper arrived without rushing the scene, and that alone changed the temperature. Experienced supervisors don't need theatrics, they look first. She stepped out, took in the robe, the patrol position, the witness phones, the judge's posture, Branson's face. It didn't take her long to figure out this had gone sideways. Branson started explaining right away. Too fast. Too defensive. He said the woman was claiming to be a federal judge, refused to provide proper proof, and was detained pending investigation. Harper asked the question he should have been asked earlier. Had he called the courthouse? Branson said not yet. Had he contacted federal court security? No. Had he checked for judicial ID in the vehicle after receiving a safe path to retrieve it? No. That was it. The stop was basically dead right there. Because once the supervisor had to ask whether the obvious verification steps had been taken, and the answer was no 3 times in a row, the logic of the detention started collapsing in public. Harper turned to Judge Whitaker and asked for her full name. Whitaker gave it. Asked which court? Whitaker answered. Asked whether there was a direct chambers line or court security contact. Whitaker provided both from memory. Harper made 2 calls. That was all it took. 2 calls. The first confirmed that Judge Lena Whitaker was, in fact, a sitting federal district judge and had attended an official event that afternoon in robe. The second confirmed court security knew exactly where she had been headed next and had already expected her at the community forum. Minutes. That's all it took. Minutes Branson could have used at the start. The moment that confirmation came back, everybody at the station could feel it. Witnesses. The second deputy. Harper. Even Branson. The case he had invented was over. What remained was the record of how long he had refused to end it. Harper's face tightened. Not dramatic. Just done. She told Branson to release the detention immediately and step back. Judge Whitaker adjusted her robe, looked directly at the 2 deputies, then at Harper, and kept her comments short. She said authority without discipline was just ego with a badge. That line stuck because it was true. And for Deputy Cole Branson, the public detention was over. The real damage was just starting. Once Sergeant Harper confirmed the judge's identity, the stop itself was finished. The damage wasn't. Deputy Branson had detained a sitting federal judge in public, at a gas station, while refusing the easiest verification steps available to him. That's the part that ruined him. Not a split-second safety call. Not confusion that got corrected fast. A slow, stubborn refusal to check before accusing, on camera in front of witnesses. Judge Whitaker didn't turn it into a scene after the release. She didn't need to. She gave Harper a short statement right there, asked for every name and badge number involved, and made it clear she wanted the body camera footage preserved immediately. Smart move. Because once agencies realize litigation is possible, records suddenly become very important. She also asked that the gas station video be secured before it got overwritten. Again, smart. She was thinking 3 steps ahead while Branson was still trying to recover from the fact that 2 phone calls had ended the whole thing. The witnesses mattered too. Tyrone Bell gave his contact information before leaving. So did Maya Ruiz. A couple of other customers did the same. That turned this from a deputy's word against a judge's word into a documented incident with multiple angles. Bodycam, security footage, civilian recordings, dispatch logs, supervisor response. Once all of that exists, the story gets harder to bury and much easier to reconstruct. Branson tried to defend himself in the first internal report. Officers like that almost always do. He framed the stop as a good faith investigation into possible impersonation. He described the robes as suspicious. He suggested the detention was temporary and reasonable. That might have worked if the footage matched the paperwork. It didn't. The recording showed the judge repeatedly offering clean verification routes and a deputy refusing them. That gap between report and video is where careers usually start collapsing. Within days, the sheriff's office placed him on administrative leave pending internal review. Publicly, the department used the usual language: active investigation, serious concerns, commitment to professionalism, standard stuff. But inside the building, people already knew the real problem. He had no procedural excuse. He wasn't overloaded. He wasn't under attack. He just acted like checking facts was optional, because he liked his own assumption better. That review didn't stay local for long, because this was a federal judge. Once the court was notified, the incident moved past ordinary embarrassment. The chief judge of the district raised formal concerns. Federal court administration wanted preservation orders on all footage and dispatch records. Court security personnel documented the timeline. Lawyers got involved fast. No surprise there. A local deputy publicly detaining a federal judge while calling judicial robes a fake costume is the kind of thing that gets attention from people who usually don't waste time on noise, and the footage was bad, really bad. Not dramatic in the movie sense, worse than that. It was methodically stupid. That's what made it dangerous for him. You could watch the stop and count the chances he had to fix it. Call the courthouse, check the credentials, let a supervisor verify sooner. Listen to the subject. Use dispatch correctly. He missed every one. Then he made it worse by speaking like his personal disbelief was evidence. That became the center of the legal fight. Whitaker didn't file a lawsuit because her feelings were hurt. That's the part people miss in stories like this. The issue wasn't that someone doubted her for a minute. The issue was unlawful detention after available verification was refused. Public humiliation made it uglier. The Bodycam made it provable. The law made it actionable. Her attorneys focused on a few points that were hard to answer. No meaningful basis to move from inquiry to detention without first using obvious verification methods. Mischaracterization of her conduct as non-compliant when she had followed physical commands and offered identification routes. Escalation based on personal suspicion instead of objective investigation. Failure to properly communicate the facts to dispatch. Then the supervisory issue. Why the stop got that far before someone senior stepped in and did what should have been done at the start? The sheriff's office had exposure too, not just Branson. Because once a deputy behaves like that in public, the next question is training. Was he taught badly, supervised badly, or tolerated too long? Those are expensive questions for a department. If his file showed prior attitude problems, complaints, or escalation issues, the county had a bigger problem than one bad gas station stop. Then it turns into pattern and notice. Departments hate those words. Juries don't. The public reaction followed the footage. Local news ran with it first. Then legal commentary channels picked it up. Then bigger outlets. The clip that spread fastest wasn't the release. It was the deputy saying the robes were a costume until he decided otherwise. That sentence became the whole case in miniature. He had said the quiet part out loud. He had put himself above verification. That kind of clip stays alive because people instantly understand it. You don't need legal training to see the failure. A person identified herself, offered ways to confirm it. The officer refused, then detained her anyway. Everybody gets that. The department eventually announced discipline. First leave, then termination proceedings. After that came the state certification review, because getting fired is one thing and losing the ability to work law enforcement again is another. That part hit harder. A lot harder. Branson had built his authority around the badge. Once that badge became a liability, there wasn't much left to hide behind. The county also had to make changes because, after something this public, doing nothing looks like approval. Verification procedures got tightened. Supervisory notification thresholds changed. for public official impersonation claims. Dispatch language rules were reviewed, so deputies couldn't load radio traffic with conclusions instead of facts. Refresher training went out on detention standards, identification checks, and body camera report consistency. In plain English, the department had to write down rules for behavior that should have already been obvious. Judge Whitaker went back to work. That part matters. She didn't become a public crusader overnight. She didn't need a dramatic reinvention. She returned to the bench, continued her duties, and let the documentation do the talking. But the incident followed her in one important way. It made her more direct in later public remarks about institutional trust. She had lived the exact problem people often talk around. Not lawlessness, not confusion, ego. Small, unchecked ego wearing public authority. That was the lesson. Not every rights violation starts with rage. Sometimes it starts with a deputy who decides his first guess matters more than the verification sitting right in front of him. Then the whole encounter becomes a contest he has to win. That's when ordinary stops turn into lawsuits. That's when body cameras stop protecting officers and start exposing them. And that's when the person staying calm usually ends up being the one with the real power in the long run. So that was the real collapse at the gas station. Not just recognition failure, discipline failure, judgment failure, procedural failure. One deputy thought the robe was the issue. It wasn't. The issue was that he saw multiple ways to learn the truth and treated all of them like threats to his authority. What would you have done in that situation? And have you ever seen somebody with a badge turn a simple check into a full-blown ego contest?